Pretty exciting end to the primary season. How are you feeling going into this general election?
Well, I think it's great. First of all, we had an enormous primary turnout, and that's a good thing. Primaries are a good thing, and I think it shows that people are excited to get rid of Mitch McConnell and move Kentucky forward, so I'm excited about that.
Right after the election, you said that your opponents made you a better candidate. You got beat up in that, and if you look at the data, you were not winning the day of vote. Some would argue that your trajectory is going down, that you don't have the groundswell of support going into the general election. How can you get your trajectory back up? Do you feel what I said is true, or do you argue against it?
Well, I mean, I think people are angry, and everybody's voice needs to be heard. And I think that's what you saw in this primary, that people were wanting to come out, wanting to make their voice heard. We had incredible opponents who had a really inspirational message at an important time. And now we're going to come together, and the ultimate mission is to defeat Mitch McConnell. So I think it's just fine, and we're working towards that end.
Something I heard from Democratic politicians, activists, and supporters, voters, was that they felt that Charles Booker was the authentic candidate, and they questioned whether you could be that authentic candidate. Can you be an authentic candidate going into the fall? Will people really know who Amy McGrath is before they go to the ballot box?
Sure. I mean, I am authentic right here and right now. I mean, I think that, I authentically ran on the things that I feel we can do in Kentucky, and the common sense approach that I think we need right now, particularly with everything that's going on with the pandemic and everything else. And my opponents ran on what was authentically them. So I think this is really good, and we're all coming together because I'll tell you what, we share a belief that healthcare, for example, needs to be more affordable and accessible for everyone. We share a belief that everybody should have a chance to vote in the middle of this pandemic. We share a belief that we believe that Mitch McConnell has got to go. And so I think these are things that can unite us.
While you mentioned it, how should we vote in November? How should the system be set up considering we're in COVID-19?
Well, I think everybody should be able to get a chance to vote by mail, and that needs to be made accessible to everyone. So we need to have the same way of being able to get that ballot on the internet. I think the state needs to make a really good effort to educate all voters. And there needs to be the ability to vote in person if you don't want to vote by mail. But I'll tell you, in a pandemic, you should not have to put your life at risk to be able to vote.
That mail-in vote saved you in this election. I looked at the data. The mail-in vote, you won overwhelmingly, but your opponent on election day, he took it home the day of voting. So how do you then woo the people who are going to go to the polls that they've got to stay for Amy McGrath and not go for an opponent?
Well, I think, again, we need to be united in getting rid of Mitch McConnell, and we share the beliefs, and supporters of my opponents, it's awesome, the passion that they brought for this election and making their voices heard. And I'll tell you, we share the belief in making sure that we have affordable health care, making sure that we got to work on wages and good quality jobs. And right now, the social, racial injustice that we've been seeing in this country for far too long, and we need to have leaders to go to Washington to actually tackle those things, and that's what I want to do. So I think we're going to be able to unite everybody and go forward here. We got 4 months, and we can make history by beating Mitch McConnell.
The concern over racial justice has been huge in Louisville. The largest demonstrations in the state have taken place here. Where do you stand on the situation with Breonna Taylor? Do you believe that the officers should be charged with murder?
I think the investigation is still ongoing. And this is why it's so important to have an independent investigation when something like this happens. This is a terrible tragedy, did not need to happen. And so we need to have an independent investigation. Families should have that and shouldn't have to wait this long for that. And let's find out what happened and then go forward.
If an independent investigation finds that there's no wrongdoing on the side of the officers, what would you tell people who don't want to believe that or feel in their heart that that's not the case?
Well, I think there clearly needs to be police reform in this country. And that's why what you've seen the House pass bills, a real bill that has some teeth to do some things on police reform in this country. And what did you see in the Senate? You saw Senator Mitch McConnell water down that bill, basically give it no teeth. And this, again, is why we need to get rid of him. I think we should be doing some police reform in this country.
You accuse Mitch McConnell of watering down that bill, and he says it was the House Democrats who torpedoed that bill before it really had a chance.
Well, I have to respectfully disagree there, because he did water down that bill. The bill that was passed in the House and what the Senate Democrats put together had some real measures for things like banning chokeholds. for measures that most people believe we should be doing. And so in my mind, he didn't even really look at those measures that really need to be done. He just watered it down and said, hey, let it go back to the states and local.
Where do you stand? You flew a fighter jet in service to the country. And you, I'm sure, have gotten at least a ride in a Rhino or another armored carrier. Some of our police departments have some of those same military equipment, and there's now a question about militarized police forces. Where do you stand on that, and should the police agencies in this country have access to some of that military-grade equipment?
Well, I think in the bill that was passed in the House, if I remember correctly, they got rid of the idea that you would put military equipment and give it to police forces in this country. We don't need to be doing that. I think police forces, every single police force needs to look at what they need for their communities. And let's not militarize our country. I mean, I've been to places like Afghanistan. I've been to places in the Middle East where, frankly, I don't want that type of environment here. And so we got to take a look at this and going forward.
Rand Paul's been fighting against the militarization of police forces for a long time.
Yeah. I mean, I would be for not allowing our military equipment that is used for combat to be used here in the United States. I think that's kind of a no-brainer.
We've been seeing Charles Booker since the election tweet about his experiences afterwards and his thoughts on the upcoming race. Have you had a chance to speak with him?
I have.
And what did you say?
Well, we both agreed that we got to do whatever we can to defeat Mitch McConnell, and we both, we have mutual respect for each other. We have a lot of things that we want to work on, and to his supporters, there was a movement that was built that was inspiring at an important time. We got to build on that and move forward. Do
you need his endorsement to beat Mitch McConnell?
I think that we're going to be together moving forward, and I think we're going to be able to campaign together, and I really look forward to that. We have enormous amount. I'll tell you what our differences are so small in compared to what our mutual differences are with Mitch McConnell.
Do you need him to say, I endorse Amy McGrath to beat Mitch McConnell, knowing how passionate his followers have been for him?
I would love for him to say that, to endorse Amy McGrath to beat Mitch McConnell, and I can't wait for that to happen.
We anticipate this afternoon, and by the time most people see this interview, that Governor Beshear will have issued some new regulations connected to COVID-19. Where do you stand on wearing a mask? Should it be a mandatory use of a mask? Should people be required to wear masks in Kentucky?
I think, it's prudent to, when you're indoors and you can't socially distance from people, I think it's a really prudent thing to have a mask on. And if the governor feels like, hey, it needs to be mandated based on the what's happening in the pandemic here in Kentucky, then you know what? That's his prerogative, and we need to take care of each other. We have to tackle this pandemic before we can get our economy back, and I think we should be looking at ways to do that.
How do you feel about sending your kids back to school this fall in the middle of all this?
I think like many parents, I'm really concerned, but the American Academy of Pediatrics has said kids need to go back to school. And they need to learn. So we've got to find a way to be able to do this safely. And I know there's a lot of really smart people, educators who are trying to do that. And I look forward to trying to get our kids back to school as much as we can. But we are in a pandemic, and we have to take care of each other during this time too.
During this situation, we've seen the rush to get a vaccine put together. If a vaccine is introduced late this year, next year, will you take it? Do you feel like enough testing's been, will you feel as though a rush to get a vaccine on the market?
Here's the thing with vaccines. My mother had polio and was integral in the 1950s when Jonas Salk, Dr. Salk, got the vaccine together, and Dr. Sabin up the road in Cincinnati. And it takes a lot of work to do this safely and effectively. We need to listen to public health experts. If public health experts like Dr. Fauci are saying this is safe, I would absolutely take a vaccine. And I would encourage other people to. But we've got to listen to the experts here. And then we have to have leaders that make a vaccine, not only make sure that it's safe, but effective and available for everyone. In other words, that people shouldn't have to pay for it. I think that's really important.
I'm going to go to the line of questioning that I'm sure you enjoy the most, I say sarcastically, and that is, just yesterday there was a story on CNN talking about how the Democratic Party really needs Amy McGrath, even though they think maybe Amy McGrath doesn't stand a real chance of winning because she's a fly in the ointment to Mitch McConnell, keeps Mitch McConnell tied up. He can't fundraise for other Senate Republicans who may be in danger, and it keeps him occupied. Are you a fly in the ointment, or are you a real contender to take down Mitch McConnell?
Well, I didn't get in this election or this race to be a fly in the ointment. And I didn't get in it for just the Democratic Party. I got in it to defeat Mitch McConnell because he is so bad for Kentucky and so bad for our country. And I'll tell you that if there was no path to defeat him, I wouldn't be in it, because we have to get rid of him. And this is too important not to. All right. So I believe we can do it because people are tired of him. They are tired of the dysfunction, not only here in Louisville, but all around Kentucky. And that's not a partisan thing to say. When you tell people, hey, here's a man who's been in office for 35 years, he wants to be in office for 42 years, what has he really done for you? And I say this all around the state. Remember, in the 2 years he had all the power where he couldn't point the finger at the other side, what did he do? Did he tackle health care? No. Did he do anything on the opioid drug epidemic that we have meaningfully? No. Did he do anything on infrastructure that we badly need in Kentucky? Not only roads, bridges, dams, but also broadband and 21st century infrastructure? Nothing meaningful. The only major piece of legislation that he passed in the 2 years he had all the power was a big fat tax cut for people just like him. That's who he works for. Special interests, and we're tired of it because we got to get our democracy back, and we got to get the stopgaps who are stopping our democracy, our very democracy, from working out, and that's Mitch McConnell.
Thanks for spending the time with me, social distancing on a hot summer day. I appreciate it.
It's great. It's great to be here.